All right, good morning, everyone. So what we will be discussing with you today, I thought you'd said it already. Stella Porto, I mean, if he's down Presant, I'm Stella Porto, right? So, all right. So for those, may you raise your hand that if you were last year in the conference last year in Lille? Okay, not too many people. Okay, so I'll give you a little bit of context why this is kind of a hook with what we shared last year. So last year we had the end of 2022, we had just finished this work on building a framework, digital credential framework for the Inter-American Development Bank where I work. And I'll give you a little bit of context so you understand why a development bank is doing this. So today what we're going to do is talk about what happened after that framework was done and how it helped shape what we're doing there. It was actually, I'm actually happier than I thought I would be in terms of how it helped me. So thank you. And also I think the way we looked at it in a broad way, it has helped other people. And that's also one of the reasons why we're talking about it here, because this was published it's an open document, so it can inspire other people to think about creating this kind of framework for themselves and adapting it, etc. All right, so it's just here, right? Yes. All right. So a little bit of context so I can explain, why a development bank is in the badging world. So in a development bank, usually the mission of a bank is to lend money for development projects in the region they serve. In our case, we serve Latin America and the Caribbean, right? So within that context, there is a large knowledge area. And why knowledge? Because you have all the sectors of a development bank related to social and economic development. So, I'll be talking today about SDGs and all this, because this is very much mainstream for us. And within that, this knowledge area produces knowledge that comes out of research done by the economists. The bank has a bunch of them. And also a lot of lessons learned, so a lot of tacit knowledge that is also produced during large projects that are financed in the region. So within that context, in this knowledge area, we also have capacity building. A lot of projects, I'll give you an example, you might have a system that is being created for registry of citizens in some kind or other in Mexico, and there is capacity building related to something related to the project. So I would put capacity building in two buckets. One is just analytical kind of knowledge that is produced by research that the bank does, and capacity building is sort of a dissemination of that knowledge. But also there is knowledge that is what we call operational, because it is connected to these operations, to these projects that are happening in the region. So there's a wide variety of courses that we offer online. We have our own learning platform, which is based on Moodle, but we also have programs that come out of edX and Coursera, for example, and that are all offered in the region. So although the mission of the bank, starts with loans and grants, we do have this main element there that is associated to the capacity building, which is technical assistance and the extensive research. So as a knowledge provider and this capacity building that I just explained, and not being a university, the need for recognition is just a no-brainer, right? So in 2018, we started a badging initiative, I could call it that way, with two major goals. One was we wanted to recognize, that was the first goal, recognize the capacity building that we were offering, right? Give some recognition to that. And also be influencers in the region to broaden the ecosystem of recognition. Although I have to confess that when we started, that word recognition was not there. Now it looks very easy and fine, but it was not there in the beginning. The first things that we did were very much, we want to give recognition. We have certificates. We're going to move away from certificates and give something more meaningful that says more. And I think as we advanced and related to the framework that we're going to talk about, I think the element of recognition started sort of rising and then opening up to give recognition for other things that were not just capacity building. Okay? All right. So our journey, like I mentioned, I don't know exactly where in the slide, so sometimes I'll talk before the slide shows, but no problem. So what I have dear to my heart is actually what I have there in bold in terms of the goal. We wrote this right from the beginning because I did think that given the role that IDB has in the region in terms of talking to governments and connecting the many countries in the region, that we could be this agent of change. And it was very clear to us that to become an agent of any change, we need to do it ourselves. We needed to be an example in order to have any influence in the region. So that is the part that I think is more interesting and that we're getting there. And for us, thinking of digital badges was really very easy, right? So we didn't have the constraints of a credit system or any of that kind of mapping that really held us back into doing this. So we were a very good fit. All our capacity building is really within the realm of continuing education. As I explained yesterday in the panel, our audience are usually professionals, many of them in the public sector in the region, Latin America and the Caribbean. All right. So now this is what we're at. You know, we started in 2018, and now we have more than 800 badges and 230,000. Maybe Romina would say now you just passed that. And why? Because I do think that the process of doing this and working on the framework helped us to recognize the many opportunities of recognition. So we started thinking of just the courses, and as we move forward, it's just this, I call it like a playground of opportunities for recognition, like a candy store, you know, that you have all this, and you just need to unveil them. And as soon as you have these examples, people start seeing the opportunities, you know. As soon as you see one, then you recognize another one. Sometimes you create these pathways, you know, routes of recognition. And this, actually, when we started thinking of the framework, we already had plenty of badges. They weren't as varied as they are now, but we already had, let's say, you know, the courses. We had some that were associated to programs. I think we had at the time started doing some events, but that was basically it. I think what we have done with the framework was expand the opportunities of recognition.
You had a practice of badging that we...
Exactly. We had a practice, and the framework was really to put that together. You know, like you had a messy closet, and you didn't have like standards for each thing. So the framework helped us to organize things. And as we did that, many significant outcomes came out of that. And that's what we're going to share with you. So before we go into what we learned, this is I would say, the core of the framework. The document is a document that has principles, and we used work from many others that had already done frameworks before. Don did a great job, and I think this was an output of this work that is really worth mentioning, because he put together a research. So there's like a gigantic table comparing all sorts of frameworks, you know, how do they treat each part? And I think that output, even though it's not the framework itself, it can serve a lot of people to like a stepping stone into this. So what we did, and those who were here listening to Don yesterday can kind of see some elements, similarities here in how organizing these categories from more formal to informal. And one of the elements here that is pretty interesting and we're starting to work with is the part with organizations, right? This is the kind of story that I'm still building, but this year, 2024 is totally going to be a year for badging organizations. Why? Because we have a lot of alliances and partnerships. So many times you have organizations that say, oh, can we use the logo from IDB to show that we are doing this and that? No, let's give them a badge that not only has the logo, but actually explains what the partnership is, and then you can actually use that to stimulate more collaboration, right? So that is where the organization part. So here you're gonna find all the things that you can recognize, from the formal part, you have badges that have assessments, maybe just knowledge assessments, and then others that are more related to the workplace where you can actually assess performance. Then you move to maybe capacity building that doesn't require too of a rigorous assessment, but you need to complete something. We even have two flavors of that, something that you have to do more work and you have to complete, others that you just have to participate. We do a lot of events, all over the bank. And then we go into flexible recognition, and for example, we use that. We have a lot of hackathons and awards. Just yesterday, actually came out an email that the finalists for the Technology Innovation Award, and this is all internal, right? Our audience is both internal and external, but this is an internal thing. And immediately I emailed my supervisor and said, why are we not giving badges to these finalists? Because the finalists, they will be forgotten, right? The person who won will be remembered, and the finalists, they will know that they are finalists, but no one will talk about that. So let's recognize the finalists who actually got somewhere in that process, right? So that is how we use flexible recognition, anything that is more like an individual with very specific things or groups. And then community of practice. So we have started to use badging to just represent that I belong to a group, right? And what does that mean to belong to a group? And then, milestones, we don't have too many programs, just very few. And then the organization ones. Okay. So the impact of the framework, I think it helped us first naming and defining things. So now, for example, I go around talking credenciales bid, credenciales bid, credenciales bid. There was no credenciales bid as a name before the framework, because building the framework required to identify how the system works and give it names so we can communicate. So for example, I remember very well that when we were communicating, we would just throw out the word platform a gazillion times, and they meant different things depending on the paragraph. So that was one thing I said, we can't just have platform here, and sometimes we're talking about the back end, sometimes we're talking about for users. So that naming and defining was really an important element and very useful now in all the communication that we're doing. So thinking and conceptualizing what we wanted, with all this, then visualizing, and like I said yesterday, communicating to me is like critical, so having the elements to communicate clearly. And then, super important, streamlining the processes, making it really easy for those who are not thinking about badges every day. They're not supposed to be thinking about them. They're supposed to use them and not, have to think too much. So that was, the framework helped in that. And finally, related to that goal that I mentioned before, making connections, influencing others. We have now universities in the region that come to talk to us about this. We have, we serve sometimes agencies in different countries that they might be starting doing this, and they can just like piggyback on us, and we can help them do this kind of work. All right, so naming and defining, I mentioned credenciales bid, that was the name that came out to define this as a whole, right? And even define, okay, I have a factory that produces badges. I have the passport, because we use Open Badge Factory. So we want, and here the names are in Spanish. Spanish is our, we have 4 official languages, but Spanish, I would say that is 90% of what we do is in Spanish. And then the services. And the service component is really the naming, but also the association with what I talked about, streamlining, is really to define services and define how they happen and have them documented. So we have a whole ticket system. You know, we have a lot of creators around the bank, you know, with the numbers that you saw, and having these services well defined, people know where to go, etc. This is also a byproduct of that. So here, the thinking and conceptualizing. So when we started with the framework, this organizing of the closet that I mentioned before allowed us to then define, well, what are these badges mean, and then separating them and saying, okay, this is the different kinds of participation that I have. How do I recognize learning, practical learning, like on-the-job learning, recognizing soft skills, recognizing this impact of learning, something that we're just starting to do, which means you give a badge for someone that completed some capacity building, but then you follow up with maybe a year out, and you follow the Kirkpatrick kind of methodology of evaluation. So instead of just doing like the level 3 of questionnaire and all that, you actually have a badge application where people can actually say, here's my evidence that I have applied that knowledge, and then I'm recognized. So you're not using people to collect data. I mean, you are a little bit, but they're getting, they're getting recognized. And then it is like having this group of people that collectively, they reflect the impact of the capacity building. And for us, that is major, right? This is the impact that we're having in the region through knowledge. So this is very important. I have to go fast. Okay. Streamlining processes, I think I talked about that. This is kind of the process that we created. We have these badge design activities. We help them develop the metadata. We have a ticket system, and all of this aligned with the framework. And then all of this part, you know, from the metadata forward, it's all transparent to the users. People don't know anything about that, and they shouldn't, right? All right, and then visualizing, communicating. So really, I would say that I was just talking to Dawn that 2024 is my like passport engagement year, which is to help people understand how to use this platform. It's not a social media platform, you know, there's a blur there, don't let them do that. But how they can really use their badges to portray themselves through different lenses, right? So we're in the midst of doing communication campaigns, and this woman, she exists, this is not a created person, Margarita Libby, she is the representative in El Salvador, and she's a champion in, not only she communicates very well, but she has a bunch of badges, and we're doing videos and all sorts of communication through the people that are using it well. All right, influencing other people. So I mentioned very quickly yesterday the work that we're doing with UNED, which is the Distance Education University in Costa Rica. You know, the first project that we have with them is for the Women Weaving, which is recognizing indigenous women in Costa Rica. But we have other projects. SUNAT is the Peruvian agency that we help them also use badges. So this has been a way, for example, I was at the ICDE conference, and our way of helping them, besides doing the panel there, we issued all the badges. They had never had badges in their conference. Now they had a bunch of them, and they already said, oh, the New Zealand version of the conference will also have badges. I mean, They haven't asked me, but at least they said they're going to do it. So, all right. This is like a major program that we have, Project Management for Results, PM4R. And in this area, very interesting, not only we have this program, but we have partners that offer the program. So these partners also issue badges through us for this program. So another way of having alliances. And now, more influencing others, I'll give it to.
Okay, thanks very much, Stella. Yeah, so I'm very, very proud of working on this project and very grateful to Stella for giving me the opportunity to do it and wear that hat, independent really of the platform that we're actually using, because I've gone on, for example, to do similar work for ITC ILO using a completely different platform, but using the same principles and applying them and sort of learning along the way. So one example of that, the ITC ILO one, we haven't yet seen the implementation of it, so I can't show you that yet. This one here is a really interesting one from the US, and it's team democracy, and it's about getting Democrats and Republicans to talk nicer to each other. So this one, listen to understand. I can listen. I may not agree with everything you say, but let's talk. And so what they've got here is some really interesting ways of doing it, and they're building deliberately off the framework that's published, which is CCBY, that Stella set up to use. So they're deliberately remixing, recombining, and adapting to their own needs. And so they have badges like certification badges, they have micro-credential badges that would have assessment, they would have, you just went through this course, good for you, you were part of an event, good for you, flexible recognition, you're a leader in the community, you've shown how to listen with people. They also have commitments. So in other words, I will vote or I will listen. And then they also have action badges. I actually did something. I hosted an event that brought both sides together for a productive dialogue. They're working a little in contrast with Stella's work, where she essentially leaves the design, the visual design of the badges up to the client organization or the partner organization. They're trying to set up something a little bit more like what HPAS did back in the old days, which is actually a bit of what Credly would do, because there's that distinctive Credly shape that is out there. Usually, often you can look at a badge and say, oh, that's probably a Credly badge. They want to have something similar for team democracy, where you look at it and say, oh, that's probably a team democracy badge. And then they're still building the actual, they have 6 domains, for example. There's one about bridging divides, there's one about civics education, et cetera. And so that would be the purple in the hand there. And then other ways of getting across the meaning of the badge. So supporting the metadata with the visual design. So that's one element. As I say, it's a work in progress. This other one is in French Canada. The French, I like to think that French is one of the superpowers of the OBF technology. So we're, as a service provider, cancred.ca, we deal with French audiences. So that same spectrum that I was sharing yesterday, and very much went forward about 1 or 2 or 3 steps working with Stella, I now have laid out here again. So it's micro-certification évaluée on the left, but then badge numérique, pas no actual assessment over on the right, but everything can be valuable. And here are just examples of the kinds of things. You can celebrate a mentor-mentee relationship. You can have webinars plus reflection. You can have a project with evidence that says you actually did something. So actual examples of it in action. And this one is kind of interesting because at a recent conference, I came across a guy named Charles Jennings virtually, but I followed up since virtually, and we're going to be working in the new year with Serge Ravet on something. Has anybody heard of 70-20-10? Okay, so 10% of your learning is actually structured courses, whether assessed or not. 20% tends to be social. This is a notional framework, a reference framework. You're not intended to think about the exact figures. 70% just doing shit, or doing stuff, trying to get stuff done, okay? And this is it's hard to see, apologies. This is the Australian Public Service Academy, which in Australia apparently goes through all levels of government, okay? And they developed, there's a fellow who developed this framework, and again, it's hard to read, but it's basically learning in the flow, at the time of need, in the flow of information, and often it's about performance support, not learning. So micro-credentials, I blogged about this. I said micro-credentials are out there like Pluto, but there's a lot of stuff here, which is job shadowing, flex projects, and things like that. Why aren't we capturing that learning better? And so that is going to be a discussion paper that Serge, Charles Jennings, and I will be starting to develop in late January to apply life-wide recognition, opening up recognition, as I like to say, to these kinds of concepts of 70, 20, 10 learning. How are we doing for time? So 2 or 3 minutes for a question or two, and then we'll pass over. Oh, okay. Yeah, actually, Philippe, yeah, if you could do that, thanks.
Thank you to both. That was yeah, amazing. I have a question around the taxonomy and the framework. How are you exposing the evidence of that learning, of that continuum of learning? How are you exposing that to the ecosystem, to learners, to employers? Like, what does that look like?
Oh, the templates, yeah.
Yeah, so based on the, and I can actually go back to the, let me go back here because then it's easier. So what we did based on this, we created templates for the metadata, because what happens is each of one of these categories, to me, this is related to the quality of a badge, right? The quality of a badge is the quality of the metadata. I mean, the image thing, like he said, we don't put too much because we have these, not external organizations, but internal clients. And so we have very few requirements in terms of image. But here, the metadata, what we do is we develop, there's a table that says, for this kind of badge, this is the kind of data that you need, minimum. Then you have some that are optional. And we work with these people. Sometimes we do drafts for them, and we make sure that they align with the taxonomy and that you have that minimum of information. Clear, some of our badges are multi-language, so they are in all the languages as they're supposed to be. So very related to quality assurance, the taxonomy. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but that's what it.
Yes. I would just add to it. For example, in the description, it says this is an X badge. This is a completion badge. And then in the criteria, which is normally just a blank slate, we have headings to say, okay, what was the assessment? Describe it, et cetera. If there is, yeah.
You mentioned assessment, but some of them
Yeah.
do not have assessment.
No, so I guess
Yeah.
I was getting to the evidence.
So unlike Surf, who set up custom metadata fields for their thing, we're essentially just using the metadata that's structured in there and saying it's Beverly Oliver's critical information summary. If somebody's looking for these elements, show them, and as appropriate.
Now, in some cases, for example, we have a badge, the IDB community badge, that the evidence is it's done through a badge application. So people have to submit a document that they say, this is why I'm a member of this community, and that becomes the evidence. So some of them might have pegged a real piece of evidence. Others are just saying, you participate in this event, we're saying that you were there, and that's enough in terms of criteria.
What we call secondary.
Yeah.
Okay, so no.
Quick question, are you starting to observe any just value propositions from the earning of any of the badges in the development bank? For example, on the bank side, are they recognizing fewer defaults from earners who've had, been credentialed, or are earners more likely to have realized certain successes? Basically, are you able to show any kind of value propositions yet?
In terms of impact, you mean? I'm not
Impact,
sure.
or that the badges are having currency that lead to the earners, realizing increased opportunities.
Oh, people using the badges for something.
Yeah.
For, In a quantitative way, I don't think we have that yet. But on a qualitative way, and that's where I think it's really important, because sometimes the quantitative stuff is there but doesn't mean anything. So I will tell about one story to as an example. So for example, in analysis of regulation impact, for example, the agency in the country not only wants people to do the capacity building, but also wants people to show the evidence that they're using the methodology. So it is the people the supervisors in the agency that are saying, yes, I want to see the evidence of these people. So that's one case, I would say.
Okay, thanks very much, everybody.
Great. Thank you.